apologize for that. My machine just randomly decided to go blank there. So I do apologize for that, everyone, but thank you for your patience and keeping in with us. So I think I'd cut off at the point where I was just about to introduce our guest speaker, who will be running today's event and masterclass, Cindy Sissokho. So a little bit about Cindy. Cindy is a Paris-born curator, cultural producer and writer living in Nottingham and working throughout the UK and internationally. Her work has a specific focus on decoloniality in the arts in global south
epistemologies, yes,
and artistic practices.
I'm sorry about it.
She studied cultural mediation at University Paris 8, spending 1 year at Panteion University in Athens, Greece. Cindy completed her MA in cultural events management at Montfort University in Leicester in 2015. Since 2018, Cindy has worked for New Art Exchange Nottingham as a curator and special projects producer in a role that involves curating exhibitions, managing the organisation's touring exhibitions programme, and coordinating international projects in collaboration. In 2020, Cindy was appointed Associate Curator for the Casablanca Biennale in Morocco. Cindy has previously worked for Nottingham Contemporary within their exhibitions team. And so without further ado, I will hand over to Cindy, who will quickly describe herself, and then we'll go over to the presentation.
Thank you so much, Saz, and thank you also everyone for joining and for this opportunity to be here and discuss and exchange and share with everyone. So to describe myself, I'm a Black woman in my late 20s. I'm in a background that has books and plants and a print behind me. My t-shirt is stripy green and white with a black collar. And I'm wearing glasses as well. And I have a little bun, an Afro-textured head as well. So this is me. So yes, thank you so much for the space and for this conversation. And Saz made a perfect introduction. I forgot how complete this bio was. And I wanted to kind of go back to certain points, and I was like, this is great, this is everything. So to maybe kind of recap a little bit, I was born in Paris, and specifically in the suburbs in the East. And this is where I grew up until I was about 19, 20. And I studied not necessarily a very conventional history of art or curating studies to do the work that I'm doing now as a curator, writer, and producer, but I've worked more around arts management and cultural events management, and very much tailored my experience after that, after university, within spaces, within gallery spaces, artist-led spaces, voluntary-led spaces, as well as doing internships and working with like organizations that were more kind of independent as well, in Leicester, in Nottingham mainly. So they were very much kind of temporary contracts, very much internship contracts, and the work that I'm doing now today at the New Art Exchange as a curator and special projects producer is my very first contract, my first permanent contract. So it's taken me about 4 or 5 years to be able to find a space that was a bit more permanent, let's say, and closer to what I wanted to do as well. So at the New Art Exchange, I've been working there since May 2018, and it's very much around exhibition curating, but also production and some of the touring in some aspects. This is how it started in the organization, very much working around the touring of exhibition, which is a whole kind of other areas of understanding exhibition, but also making exhibitions, of finding different spaces, but also having different iterations of an exhibition. So maybe this is something for you all also to consider in terms of making an exhibition and how that could also have different lives and different chapters. So that was very much part of my work at the beginning. And now more, as I said, exhibition, but also certain public program ideas, as well as international projects. So more kind of large scale coordination of projects. And right now, it's very much a project that is focused between the African continent and the UK. So kind of creating different dialogues and conversations and exchanges through exhibitions and talks and artist residencies, and that also includes my role at the Casablanca Biennale, as Saz mentioned. So this is a little bit about me. kind of like locating myself a little bit. I do also work independently as a curator and writer. I really enjoy writing as a complementary way of working. I really love collaborating as well. That's also a practice that I really enjoy. I do find myself kind of discovering skills, but also like a way of, yeah, kind of expanding my experience, but also the way that I work and that I see things. I always see collaboration as a really important point. And I've actually collaborated with Saz several times as an example. So yeah, it's a really beautiful way to also work within your practice. So that's that. And yes, the independent work is very, very important. It's creating a bit of a balance with institution and also outside of institutions. So I guess that's something that you're also considering probably with your work, and how you create that balance between your practice and how that also is inscribed within spaces, different types of spaces, different types of platforms, such as Biennale, such as festivals, such as arts institutions, artist-led spaces, or commercial galleries even. So there's such a breadth of experience and spaces and contexts in which you can kind of understand yourself as well. So this is me a little bit. And I wanted to introduce very quickly what the workshop will be. So the next couple of hours is very much around getting to know the basics, how to approach and develop and maintain relationship with galleries, kind of having a bit of tips that will relate and that can be applied as well. 4 different types of spaces, as I mentioned too: public galleries, artist-led spaces, biennales, festivals, larger institutions too. And this workshop is trying and to kind of engage in an understanding of multiple areas as well. So the steps to work with galleries, the application processes, communication, online presence, different ways in which artists can also engage with galleries and beyond as well, not solely as artists as well, but how to kind of maybe bring other elements of your work in let's say in different different areas and different practices. So all of this by covering with certain examples as well. So I've prepared some of them. And firstly, so maybe we can put the slide. I've prepared a little presentation.
Yeah, but do you want me to, I can share that for you.
Thank you, Saz. That's perfect. And we will start with a little question, more like a poll question. I don't know if you've used that function before with Zoom. Thank you. And the question is, have you ever exhibited or worked with a gallery before? So just to kind of get an idea of where everyone is at. Perfect. Gosh, this is amazing. I've never used that before. So majority, pretty much of yes. A couple of people remaining. Okay, so we're pretty much kind of half and half, really. Almost. Perfect. Thank you so much. Can that go? Okay. Share results. Okay, no, that's it. Brilliant. That's really good to know, and kind of maybe a way of me also kind of tailoring a little bit some of the answers. And I wanted to also mention that it's really important as well, if you wish to raise your hand and ask a question and feedback, comments as we go as well, to create a bit more of a dynamic, a bit of a rhythm where, you know, we can be more in exchanging conversation and discussion during this workshop. So that's very much welcome for you to do so. And I really appreciate that. So please do feel free to do so. I might not see it as I speak, but yes, please do feel free to turn on your mic and talk, or put it in the chat as well. So we're going to go through quite a lot of content. So we will be having a bit of a break in between, as Saz mentioned, probably in about 45 minutes for 10 minutes. So I will be kind of giving you the bits. So the first part is getting your work ready. So one of the core questions that I've posed, which is pretty basic, but I think it's really key, is how do you actually present yourself? Which spaces and contexts do you want to be part of? How do you locate yourself within the cultural sector, the art sector, with your own practice, with your own experience, and where you would like to go as well, as a full-time artist, as a part-time artist, doing other type of work, and having different type of practices as well. So one of the thing that would come up, perhaps as a kind of natural tip that would be how to write about your work, how to talk about your work, but also what are the different tools and elements that probably needs to be worked on, or that needs to be developed, such as writing an artist bio, or at least understanding what would be your bio as an artist, what represents you as an artist. A CV as well, and this might be a bit of an intimidating one, but the CV could also be just very much elements that you've done before in the cultural sector, but not necessarily just about making exhibitions, for example. So exhibition is one way of showing your experience, and not necessarily everything about your experience if you're seeking to work with galleries in an exhibition capacity. And a statement, which kind of relates also to the bio in some ways, but will be more expanded in more of your interest, more of your research, your inspiration as an artist, that will be coming out more as a text about yourself. And sometimes some artists can collaborate with different practitioners to work with them so they can write a text for them. And it's quite a nice way to do it without having to put yourself into this task, let's say, and to collaborate with someone too that can write, someone that could know your work and that knows your work very well as well, and that you trust to do so. An alternative way of doing it could be also to record a video or make a sound recordings. And this is something that I was thinking about, because we do have this requirement, which is not always accessible, of writing, of having to kind of put works together. And there's other ways of doing so, I think, and having videos. And I think people have been doing that more recently, specifically in the kind of pandemic context of doing video portraits, but also sound recording, or recording your voice to just talk about your work. Could be a really nice way to do so too. And I think also the online presence is very key. Saz mentioned that it was mentioned too yesterday in the workshop too, but I think it's a very, very important point. And I think we've experienced and seen that more and more during the pandemic too, during the time where we were not able to be together. And the way of connecting and getting and keeping everyone connected as well was to share more online too. So we saw the breadth of like events and talks, etc., meetings really increasing during that time. But it also kind of gave us the impetus that it was really important to have some way an online presence, whether it's social media or a website or other ways. I think we need to be also more experimental about this too, and I think we need to be more bold about it. But the idea of a website or a social media presence can be kept as very simple. Doesn't have to be overcomplicated or super fashionable or very bold, but it needs to be simple and just straightforward, and also accessible as much as possible. Ideally putting accessibility settings into your website, or having descriptions within your social media profiles and channels as well. So kind of keeping different ways of making a mark of your practice, of yourself online, which can be as accessible as possible, clear, and also just simple as well, but also very complete. So really integrating this artist bio, CV statement, including images that represent your work, installation shots, if you do have that, like higher resolution ones, if possible. And yeah, so that's a pretty good, a really good and I think very valuable element to have. So I have shared couple of examples, which are, that's it. So one of them being Harold Offey, which I really love. So Harold is an artist based in the UK, I think based in Cambridge, but kind of working across the UK, so Leeds and London as well. And I really love this website. It's simple, it's colorful, not necessarily accessible for all, but it's just a way to show maybe the structure of the website itself, how to keep perhaps an image for a project. When you click on an image, you have a different project description, as well as links, inserted links, that kind of give a bit of an idea of what the different projects that you've done, and having an overview of your work. It's a really important tool, I think. And the next slide shows a different side of his website, which is more like the bio, an image. You don't have to have a similar image. This is just a nice little like wink of, yeah, it's quite nice, I think. But yeah, this is obviously very, yeah, daring, let's say. So yes, there's different ways of doing it. And it has also like a little index at the bottom, as you can see, which you can also have the choice within the website of how to connect with the work, you know, whether with the text or whether with the image, which is a bit more playful, let's say. The next slide shows maybe a website that is not, let's say, the most accessible, or the website itself as you go on it is kind of rotating. The planets are rotating, the video at the back is playing, you know, the images in the pink circle is changing every few seconds. There's no text, and it's very much about exploring as well. It's very playful, but I would say not necessarily the type of website to go for as maybe an emerging artist or someone that is willing to start as a first platform to have a website to use that sort of designs. I think it can become quite, well, firstly intimidating, but also has to reflect exactly how you want people to access the content and your work. I love this website, but maybe not as a first kind of platforms, maybe not the most accessible one either. But it's a beautiful one. And the next one, so that leads us a little bit into the portfolio as well, the portfolio content in terms of getting your work ready. I think the portfolio is really key, and maybe an extension to what a website kind of offers as well. But it's very much a piece of work, let's say, in itself that offers more of a overview on specific project, but also overview on the most recent project. I think the website, as well as the portfolio in different capacities, is a place to archive the website more as a place for archive and updating content, but a portfolio needing to be more up to date with most recent projects. So maybe the past year, 2 years, let's say, projects that were realized or that are currently in development as well. It doesn't have to be just finished projects. I think this is another thing that maybe people tend to have as a pressure of needing to have a portfolio that has loads of different projects that also are finished, that are being shown in loads of different spaces, but it's very much showing your potential, very much showing what you are about, and very much showing as well and giving a really good vision and overview of your work. And this can be designed in many different ways. And I've mentioned a bit here as a kind of checklist. So about a selection of projects, you know, most recent with a little bit of text is possible. And as I said, you know, it could also be, if the portfolio is seen online or sent via email, for example, it could be like a short video kind of talking about the work, the series of work, the project itself, or like a short recording of what the project is about, where you could be talking about it in like maybe a minute or two. A bio as well, and I would say no more than 30 pages, which sounds a lot, but I think it's really nice to have images as well, different zooms of work as well, and really kind of trying to create a bit of a narrative around your practice and your work. It's very much a document that could be activated, a bit more dynamic once again, and not necessarily just kind of looking at different projects without necessarily like a narrative and a description around it. So making it exciting, making it accessible once again, I think it's really important too. And also clear, just clear and clean, and, you know, not overcomplicated as well, just something simple. And the CV, I would say, is optional as well. I would not necessarily have a CV in the portfolio, but it can be added, I think, perhaps at the end. And I shared an example afterwards as well in the next slide from an artist called Katharina Fitz, who I worked with and actually worked with her during this portfolio. And we kind of thought that starting the portfolio with a really large image would be a really nice way to introduce her work She very much work around ceramics and installations, and very much working with the processes of making the ceramic work. So you are seeing very much the work itself, but within the structures that holds it, within the structure that she also used in order to create it too. So we have used, yes, a big image, a high resolution image as a first page, and then followed by a kind of bio slash statement, which was kind of telling a bit of an introduction about her, but also about the work. And then the next slides kind of give more of an overview of a project, and she has outlined the portfolio in that way, kind of project to project, with different large scale images, one of them being with a text, a short text, I would say, and as I said, like 200 words maximum. This is much less here, with the credits and the materials below the image, using different formats to show the images in the portfolio, to be also like larger, etc., creating more space in kind of highlighting and zooming into specific moments and bits of your work as well. I think it's a really nice way of doing it, and really immersing the person who's consulting it as well. So this is really, yeah, a really nice one, I think. Thank you, Majal. And the third part is what is the best way to approach gallery? So the actual getting in touch, the actual being in contact, and the actual creating that dialogue that really takes you to the next step. So when you feel ready, when you feel that you have everything you need and at hand in order to develop these different tools and just articulating about your work, how to actually be in touch with the spaces that you really like. Who do you want to interact with? Who do you really want to work with? Who is close to your ethics, interests, and work practices? Who represents you the best in terms of the spaces that you think will also hold your space, you know, with a lot of care, but also in terms of the relationship that you would build with them. I think it's a key point to ask yourself, and really a way to direct as well your next steps, and beyond. So we, within spaces such as New Art Exchange, for example, just to take that as a kind of experience, a regular experience, is that we have a lot of different proposals that are sent, a lot of different emails that are sent every week, every month. I would say maybe dozens of them every month, of artists that get in touch and that send emails, via emails predominantly, of different proposals, different kind of like queries as well, of how to exhibit in a space like New Art Exchange, but also very simply sometimes just kind of like having an approach of, I want to exhibit there. Can you tell me about the next steps? But there is, I find most of the time that the approach is not necessarily the most inviting. And I think there is tips in order to do so and to be a bit more in dialogue, let's say. And perhaps some of the ways to do so is to come up with a clear proposal. If you are interested, for example, to work with the New Art Exchange, what is the proposal that you would like to give? So in terms of contacting and being in touch with a curator, with a public program producer, creative program coordinator, for example, is to come up with a specific proposal, an idea of where that dialogue could go. So firstly, introducing yourself, but also introducing very briefly about your practice, maybe giving a link, a portfolio as attachment. It could also be that you are getting in touch to talk with a curator, for example, that you want to lead a workshop, that you want to have an exhibition. What are the different opportunities to exhibit? I think it's important to identify one or two maximum, I would say, elements that you would like to do with that space specifically. Because what we tend to receive is a lot of emails that maybe get kind of lost a little bit in the rest of the work, for example, as internal proposals, and don't get the extension that it should be given, for example. So maybe having a clear outline of what you would like to do, why are you getting in touch, and how as well. A really key point as well, now that is maybe potentially more possible, is to attend events and openings, attend different programs, online, offline, of the spaces, of those different platforms that you wish to be in touch with, to work with as well. Getting yourself known in that way is very valuable, and it's also giving a very first, not impression necessarily, but more like a showing that you're there, showing the work that you do, and being able and comfortable to share that and being in conversation with the relevant members of staff within spaces, for example. I think it's one that is very, very valuable, I would say. And hopefully we can do that more soon as well. So I've mentioned about the breakdown of how to mention that. And then in terms of the final point, a dialogue that needs to be with mutual care and respect as well is really, really important. Some of the emails that we receive as well, for example, can be quite direct and not necessarily warm, not necessarily giving a really good impression as a first contact. So on the next slide, I've put a quick example, and I've kept it anonymous, of course. But for example, maybe personalizing the email a little bit more, instead of having Dear New Art Exchange, making sure that it's actually, that you have research who is working in the organization, who is holding, certain positions and would be relevant for this email. So it can be also directed to the best person, not necessarily lost into a general info inbox of the organization, for example. So kind of giving a bit more details, so for example, this person has shared an Instagram account, which is really great, but we don't actually have an idea of where would that go? What is the next step about this? What is the intention? What is the desires behind getting in touch as well? So understanding a little bit the aim of the communication, I think is much better and would catch way more attention as well. And I've shared here a little resource from a practitioner, curator, and writer called Jamila Prowse, who's based in London. And Jamila did a kind of workshop and project in London called Practicing Care for Ourselves and One Another. And in this document, she has shared different ways of interacting, but also different ways of keeping practitioners accountable, for example, in communication, but also being able to maybe kind of caring and respecting more in terms of interpersonal skills, between us, within organization, working with artists, working with producers, etc. So the relationship that we create with each other as well. It's a really beautiful resource that I really recommend, and I can share the link after the event as well. But it's also readily available online. So if you do want to look into it, you can find it quite easily. So here come my first question, where I was thinking that maybe we could reflect a little bit. And if you're willing to share your reflection afterwards, please do feel free. So I will allow for a couple of minutes, 3 minutes at the least, to think about yourself, to think about where you think you are at. How ready do you feel to show with the space, if this is what you are willing to do, if this is the main kind of outcome that you wish to have in the next few months, years, etc. Do you feel like you want to do a master's, for example? Anything. What is the different steps? What are the different steps, and how do you feel? What are your needs before and when working with spaces as well? I think it's really important to also be honest in terms of what will be your, not only the desires, but what will be the type of relationship that you want to have with the spaces. What is the kind of support that you would need and want from the spaces, that you would expect to have from the spaces too. So kind of understanding where you locate yourself with who you are, but also your practice, and being honest with where you're at as well, and kind of guiding your journey through that. So I'm going to allow for 3 minutes for you to reflect, maybe take some notes and kind of meditate about this, and then we can share for whoever wants to just after.
And if you do want to share, once the 3 minutes is up, you can just unmute or use the raise hand function on the bottom of the screen, and then we'll kind of call you to unmute and share your reflections if you'd like to.
Okay, we can share if you want. I can see that someone raised their hands. And yes, Sarah, please. Hello.
Hi. Yeah, thank you so much. First of all, it's very, very helpful, everything that you are, all the advice that you're giving. I had a question that leads to what I've reflected on. So I'm a performance maker originally, and with COVID, my practice has been forced into developing into different ways, which has been great. So I've started a visual art practice. So I guess there's in the first part of the gallery talk yesterday, there was talks of residencies as well. And so this link to this in terms of approaching space. So what I would need, for example, is I would need support in developing some of the visual art practice that I've done. So I've started, for example, to do some prints, but I need support in that. And then obviously it would be great to so with that, can you approach a gallery and be like, okay, this is what I've started working on, but I would need support to finish that work. And can that be part of a residency? Is that something that you can offer? Is that something, could you approach a gallery and offer that, or would they want something that's already finished?
I think that's a really good point. And also I think very relevant for a lot of people in terms of this kind of pandemic time of rethinking about a practice that could be outside of spaces and not necessarily, having this audience as a performance artist too. But I think it's a totally valid way of proposing, part of a proposal too, to be honest about where you think you could develop your work at this stage, where you would need, why you would need the residency, for example. Yeah, I think that would be totally valid to ask for that. And just making sure that you outline this as you get in touch, as you are in dialogue as well, I think is very key. Okay, yeah, no, it's a really good idea, definitely.
Thanks.
And there are, I'm going to talk about residency programs and spaces, at least as a way to develop a practice. And as an artist, I think it's very much not necessarily like an important step, but just very much an experience that I really recommend to all artists to have this time to reflect and develop, within a very specified timeline period, but also resources that could be given to work, on a specific project, on a very specific area of your work and practice. I think it's really key. But spaces do that, spaces do specify also, do specialize as well in residency programs. Such as Delphina Foundation in London, such as Wising Art Center, for example. So these are spaces that very much run on residency programs and have exhibition programs and public programs alongside their residency in general. But yeah, I really highly recommend any type of residency opportunities, funded, not funded. There's many different types of them. But yeah, we can talk about that a little bit later. I have some advice as well in relation to that and how to keep up to date with what's available too. So thank you, Sarah. don't know if there's anyone else that wanted to share, and Millie as well. Experience with gatherers is mostly being finding or making something to fit an existing brief or in our space. Starting a conversation by proposing something myself, and feels like it would be a much more intense and challenging process. Yes, this can be sometimes maybe a little bit frustrating in terms of kind of fitting a space, not necessarily giving also exactly what you would like, and kind of working with the space with the proposal that you have very clearly. And sometimes it depends as well. It's kind of making the compromise of a space would be interesting in working with you and funding, you know, parts of your work, commissioning, producing, you know, a project, for example, a piece of work. And I guess in this kind of relations, I mean, the gallery, as we speak about this very specifically, is to maybe finding the compromise to be on both sides with what is achievable firstly, but also what actually is really close to where you would like to develop to. But yeah, I can understand that this can be a challenge as well. And it's whether actually the type of spaces as well that are reached that maybe needs to be shifted. Maybe some spaces will allow for that more. Certain spaces will have very much an agenda as well to deliver. And whether they have the resources to do so and kind of bend their own criteria, for example. So it can be quite complex, but there are spaces that do kind of take on proposals and very much support the artists with whatever they want to do. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in the region, nationally, but also internationally as well, and how spaces really open up to artists for that. So thank you for sharing. And what about, okay. Thank you. Thanks, Millie. Okay, I will carry on in this case. So the next slide, this one, as you can see, is things to do to enhance visibility and network. So this kind of relates with what we said before a little bit, with the online presence being one of the key elements. But I would like to add as well the idea of making a newsletter, for example, and to readapt this idea of presenting maybe what is on the website, what is on the social media in the format of a newsletter. So expanding the tools and expanding the different platforms in which you can share your work, in which you can really expand and also tap into different audiences, let's say, different practitioners in the way that they work. Some people would prefer reading a newsletter once a week, once a month, about an artist, about a space, what they're doing, what is on, what is currently developing, etc., the conversations around the work. And other people would be more keen to be on a social media page such as Instagram and kind of seeing and keeping up to date with an artist practice, for example, in that way. So it very much changes, and it's whether you are willing to be in those different platforms, be part of those different platforms. And I think it's about listening to where you fancy, you know, listening to where you want to put your energy as well. And I will talk about that afterwards as well. Putting your energy into this type of platforms and constantly feeding that maybe can drain a little bit your creative energy too. So it's kind of finding a balance as well of how many platforms do you really feel you can populate regularly, you can actually update and keep up to date really. What happens sometimes is artists get overwhelmed and they cannot always do that, you know, updating website and putting Instagram posts and Facebook, etc. every day or every week. It's a lot. I think it's a lot of demand. But unfortunately, this is also a way where people really connect with a practice, a space, etc. So there is a compromise to be done here, I think, as well. But it's very much about finding the way in which you want to invest yourself online. But I do think it's an important point as an artist today. So the second one is Artist Studio. Artist Studio doesn't necessarily have to be physical. It can also be online as a Zoom meeting, as a Google Hangouts, whatever is more comfortable as well. And it doesn't have to be in the space of a studio as well. A lot of artists do not have studio. Having a studio is quite a privilege sometimes, especially if you live in London, if you live in a bigger city or else, you know, this is not necessarily something that everyone has, or a space to be able to work outside of the home. very much focused on the practice. So an artist studio visit could very much be online and just a question of having a conversation with a group, with a collective, with other artists, with a curator, a writer, etc. So it's another way of maybe naming a dialogue that is a bit different than just sending an email to an organization, for example. So that's something that I highly recommend. And I have to say, within last year, I have done quite a few. They are very, just very exciting in general, just being able to share with artists within the studio or not about their work, and just being able to see some of the things that they are doing. Obviously, there's the frustration of not seeing things with your own eyes sometimes, but it's just being able to have that connection. And it was actually last year very almost like an openness, more of an openness from artists and curators, for example, to connect more and not necessarily waiting for openings, not necessarily waiting for this kind of more formal meetings in person, let's say. So there was definitely like let's say a better atmosphere, a better vibe in terms of connecting with people online in that way, and blurring a little bit the lines between the very professional and the kind of like formal conversation, you know, in comparison to a chat on Zoom, which can be really nice and bring really nice connection and collaboration, as I mentioned as the last point here. And as I mentioned also earlier, how to collaborate with a curator, to collaborate with another artist in terms of writing a text about your work, in terms of just even doing a talk together, etc., which could be shared across different networks, which could be, you know, visible in someone else's network, etc. So it's about kind of creating those different bubbles, let's say, where you can be seen as well and sharing, but also very much finding the bubbles that really very much connect and resonates with you as well. The practitioners that have similar ethics and ways of working that you can connect with, or artists that have, you know, similar themes in their work, for example. So a way of collaborating as a way to be more visible too. And it's just a really nice way, I think, to work as well. So the image that I put here is, yeah, just an online studio visit, by the way. I just thought I should illustrate it in some way. And the next slides, please. Thank you. Another key point is the administration, which relates to, I guess, the rest. And the key question being how to manage and plan your administration in communication too. As I said, this can be something that can drain your energy sometimes, your creative energy, and having to be on top of emails, being responsive, and feeling like you're efficient and productive. But this can be a bit of a trap, I think, sometimes, and maybe a distractions to the work that you need to do, the work that you enjoy doing in terms of researching, developing, producing your work, but also surviving as well. You know, emails and not necessarily a way to bring income, for example. So there's other ways that you need to or have to focus on. That doesn't necessarily means that you are fully available to do that kind of work, the administration type of side of things. So, for example, a way to also do communication is to work with someone. This, once again, is a privilege as well, to have an assistant, to have a manager, to have someone that can do that sort of work. It could be a volunteering position. It could be someone that is willing to learn as well how to work with an artist, that would be really excited about developing that skill very simply. So that could be a really interesting thing. And you might have seen that kind of ads on the Arts Council website sometimes on the kind of opportunities. Yes, perfect question. I'm literally just thinking about that. Thanks, Sarah. So the idea, I've seen many times Arts Council website, for example, on the jobs opportunities, how they have like certain job description that kind of give a bit of an idea of how much an assistant would be paid, what are the kind of task that needs to be made as well. And I guess it's something that is to be identified as well within your own needs. What do you need from someone that could be working with you? Is it someone that would be technically working with you. For example, you have a ceramic studio. Are you willing to have someone to work with you, you know, in terms of preparing the ceramic, or in terms of doing emails as well, etc., etc. So identifying your needs once again. But I would say that this is quite maybe a bit of a privileged position to be able to do so. So I highly recommend it, of course, but it can be quite demanding in some ways. But yeah, a volunteering position could be interesting. For example, with the students that would be really willing to do so, against maybe using a studio, against, you know, exchanging skills. That could be a way to do that. And if you are actually managing this yourself, it's very much being honest with the time that you wish to spend on doing that. So make sure that you identify periods where you need to research, produce, for example, make an out of office that would be explaining this, that you will not be replying to an email very quickly, for example, but that doesn't mean that you're not keen to work with certain spaces in galleries and curators, but very much being honest and open to where you're at, what is your capacity at the moment, but just, yeah, mentioning that you work, maybe have another job for 2 days a week, but that your role as an artist is the rest of the week. So making these things kind of like clearer if you need more time, if this is something that that you need, very simply. And that's absolutely fine to do so. I think, yeah, an out of office, very simply, for example, is a really good one. Or an alternative to emails, just a phone call, for example, text message if relevant as well, depending on what kind of work as well. So I think it's important to respect how you wish to work alongside a creative practice, because that can be quite distracting maybe. And the next slide, I've put a couple of resources. No, I haven't, sorry, I will share them. Another practitioner called Jamila Prowse, as I mentioned again previously. She's doing really amazing work in terms of accessibility, around email signatures guidelines, for example, accessibility documents for artists, as well as just this out of office, for example, which I think was really brilliant, and just very honest as well, of sharing resources, but also being, yeah, once again, sorry, I'm repeating again, just being honest with where you're at. You know, this is a busy moment. I won't always be on my emails and might not respond on time, etc., etc. So maybe this one is quite informal, maybe in some ways. It's for you to judge and adapt, but I think it's a really nice way to give yourself some space, but still obviously showing that you are on top of things, working and very motivated to work, let's say. And that people need to adapt to the way that you want to do that as well. So the next slide is focusing more on portfolio reviews. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on that. That is more part of how to also enhance the visibility of your work, but also very much a space that will provide criticism, constructive criticism and feedback about your work, you know, about a specific project, about yourself in general. There are many different platforms that offers portfolio reviews. For example, and this is very much specific to photography, the portfolio from Format Festival, which takes place every year. So the Format Festival is a biannual festival, but they have like a kind of shorter, smaller version every year, every other year then, in between the larger photography festival in Derby. They're based in Derby, at Derby Quad. So they have a portfolio review taking place at that time, where they have hundreds of different curators, practitioners in general, that are offering reviews of your work. So you could kind of register and get to be in contact, in conversation with 5 to 6 curators throughout a day, 2 days, so depending on what you would like to do and be in touch with. But yes, I think they're really, really good ways to get to know also curators very simply too. And you have the chance to choose who you want to be in contact with. So it's a great platform. It's something that I really enjoy doing as well. And I highly recommend it in terms of, getting to know yourself, getting to know your work, getting to getting your work known by other curators and practitioners, and also getting some good feedback from a breadth of different people that have different backgrounds within the sector as well. There's a really great kind of smaller organization school, let's say Art University school, called Work Show Grow as well. They're based in Margate, but they very much work around the UK. And they are really, really good in terms of having great resources, reviews, and crits for artists as well. And they also have portfolio reviews, of course. So they are really, really good in terms of providing that too. And I did a few with them last year and earlier this year. And it's always been a really good opportunity to meet artists for myself too. And yeah, really great feedback always about that. And you will see that most of them are free, but some of them also have a fee to participate. So yeah, it really depends. Depends on which one. And the next slide is other tips. And actually, I might stop here for a little break before we go into the tips, just to allow you for some little comfort break if you wish to. And we can come back in 10 minutes approximately at 10 past, if you're happy to do that. And if you have any questions, I can be here as well to chat.
Yes, so do feel free to, go and grab a drink. It's a very warm day, so do keep yourself hydrated. It's also an opportunity just to quickly nip to the loo, just to kind of get up and stretch your legs a little bit, take some time away from the screen. And then we'll reconvene at, let's say, 12, I know it's very specific, 12 minutes past 5. Cool. I'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
And what I'll do, during this break, I know that Cindy mentioned a few projects like portfolio reviews and Jamila Prowse. So I will place links to those projects and to websites mentioned during the break as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Saz.
Hi, LaShawn. I don't know if you're still there. Thanks so much for your question. Cindy will be sure to answer that when we resume the session as well. And I'm happy to also answer and kind of give my take as a curator as well. But I'm sure Cindy's answer will may be very much similar to mine. But yes, we'll definitely answer that. Thank you so much for popping that question in the chat. Hi everyone, I hope you're all ready to start back. Hope you've managed to have time to just get up and stretch your legs and grab a drink as well. We'll be resuming the session within the next few moments. And yes, if you do have questions, do feel free to pop them in the chat. If we're not able to answer your question throughout the presentation, there will be some time at the end for Q&A, and you'll also be able to ask the question directly if you feel comfortable in doing so, or we can ask the question on your behalf from the chat. So Cindy, there's a question from LaShawn in the chat. I don't know if you wanted to answer that. I mean, I mentioned that I'm happy to give my take as well, but
please do. Yes, of course.
Say, might be quite similar to what I have to say. So I don't know.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I think as a so I completely understand. I think in terms of social media, it's not for everyone, and for some people stay away from social media for a number of reasons. I mean, I'm not an artist myself, but I did have I remember I had an Instagram page which was kind of like a mixture of kind of work and kind of personal, but I made the decision to kind of get rid of my Instagram. So that was kind of like very much like a big part of my like online presence that disappeared. But one thing that I did do more or less around that time or before I deactivated my Instagram account was I made sure that there was stuff online that where people could kind of look at the work that I've done and make sure that I was easily kind of like searchable. So a website was something that I created, and it was a very simple website, with just bits of work that I've done with a CV. So some of the things that Cindy kind of mentioned earlier on in the talk, and then obviously a link to kind of like my, you know, to my email address. I think another way, I mean, I know that LinkedIn isn't always the most popular site for artists, but LinkedIn is another really good place where you can put announcements, you can, you know, you can post what you're up to. I think also, I think another really good website for artists is the Dots, and I'll pop the link in the chat. So the Dots is kind of, you could say it's like a more informal version of LinkedIn, but it's specifically for creatives. You can place your portfolio on there. And a great thing about the Dots is that they actually do, they sometimes feature your projects like on their front page. So, you know, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people using that website who will be able to have a look at what you're doing. It's a really good way of people connecting as well. So people can, you know, curators or producers who are looking for people with certain skills or specialities can post things up and you can connect with them quite easily. I found that, yeah, it's a really great and kind of easy site to use. Membership and registration is free as well. There's also websites like Behance, which I know are more specifically for kind of graphic designers and illustrators and photographers, and that's run by Adobe, and that's another really nice portfolio website that you could use as well to house your work. You know, even things as well like YouTube, having a YouTube page, or Vimeo if you do video work or performance work. That's another really good way to kind of have your work out there as well, and for people to search your work. But I think as you begin to create relationships with galleries and you begin to, I think, get your work out there, there will be stuff online in terms of kind of the organizations that you've worked with or the galleries. So sometimes when I Google artists, or even Google myself, like, you know, sometimes it will be stuff that I've done where it will result may come up from a page of a gallery or an organization that I've worked with. But I think if you're still very new, you need to really be building that online presence yourself. So make the most of those websites like the Dots and even LinkedIn and YouTube, websites where you feel more comfortable using if you're not ready to use specific social media, but maybe having a social media page specifically for your it might be worth having that, like an Instagram page specifically just for your artwork. And I know that there are artists out there and creatives who have Instagram pages purely to showcase their art and to showcase their process. They don't follow anyone. But it is purely there for people to see. So that could be another option where you just have your page out there, not necessarily following people, and then kind of update it periodically. But I think Instagram at the moment for me as a curator, particularly in these times, is a really easy go-to website. But if there isn't an Instagram page, I'll normally Google the artist. And so, you know, there has to be, so if there isn't much about you online in terms of, you know, work that you've done with organizations, things on their websites, you have to build that up for yourself. And then, you know, once you've gained some, you know, you've gotten your name out there and stuff, you know, it'll be easier for people to approach you directly. They'll know about your work from other sources. But definitely kind of thinking about the things that Cindy spoke about at the beginning in terms of building that online presence. Do look at those options, but look at the options that are right for you, because I think it's also about knowing what's best for you and kind of knowing your boundaries as well, which was something that she picked up on as well. So I hope that's helpful, LaShawn. Sorry to hijack.
No, that's good. That's perfect. But also you're talking from experience, you know, from having anti-gallery and etc., etc. So it's perfect. Thank you. Okay, we should carry on in that case. If we can put the slides back up. But do feel free to jump in and ask.
Yes, and just before we put the slides, I just wanted to say, if you do have any questions and they don't get answered right now, we will have the time. So I'll keep a track of your questions so that we can, so that you can ask them before we end the session. So
perfect. Thank you. Brilliant. And the next one, which take us to the artist development schemes. No, we haven't actually. We haven't done the question. Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Saz. So in terms of other tips, so this is kind of like more of a general point once again, which might repeat a little bit of some of the elements that I mentioned earlier. So one being the newsletter, but specifically focusing as well on kind of keeping up to date with calls. So the newsletter that you can follow, not necessarily the one that you make about your work, but who is important to follow. So for example, Arts Council and any updates of funding, any updates of jobs and opportunities, or Art Fund or Biennale Foundation, for example, which are spaces in which you might be interested in engaging with, not necessarily as a place to interact, but more in terms of funding, more in terms of grants that could be available for your practice, for your work, as well as just general updates about the sector. I think it's really key also to understand as an artist, as a practitioner, which kind of context in which you locate yourself. What is the kind of UK landscape about the arts and culture sector? What are the latest updates about the policies within the arts? And I think it's a really key one. Also in kind of getting yourself involved with galleries and spaces that are publicly funded or funded by Arts Council, for example. How does that relate to the way that they work? How does that relate to the way that you want to work as well? I think it's really key to kind of getting a bit of an idea of the different institutions, but also I guess that kind of relates also to governments, policies, etc., within the sector, and getting an understanding of that, of where you locate yourself within that, where you want to be within that as well. So maybe newsletters would be a really good way to kind of connect with the sector more broadly and in more depth, maybe, if you wish. Another one being also for yourself this time as well. I should have put that a little bit earlier in the conversation. Actually, I just realized that now. But the mailing list for the newsletter, how do you populate also your own mailing list for your newsletter? How do you get contacts? There is very specific kind of confidentiality clause at the moment, which has been in place for a few years now, and which do not allow for people to add, email address that are found online without the consent of that person to be added within mailing lists. So this is actually not allowed to do so anymore, purely for confidentiality kind of policy. So it's really important to make a connection with someone before adding someone into a mailing list. But the mailing list is something that I really recommend in terms of populating and trying to increase with people that are relevant to your work and where you want to be, really. Kind of like the environment in which you want to navigate in. So that's a really key one. And newsletters are a bit of a journal, as I said earlier. It's a way to show what you're doing, and the people that are relevant to you that access that information weekly, fortnightly, or monthly, whatever you want to use it for and how you want to use it for. Another one is follow practitioners that you really like and get in touch with them. Do not be shy. This is a really, really nice way as well to, just connect, once again, which relates to doing a studio visit, for example, online, which relates to connecting with spaces as well, indirectly too. So if there's someone that you really love, that are really doing the work that you want to be kind of connected with, do get in touch. And hopefully the person is open and willing to give a bit of time to discuss and to kind of advise, etc. So it relates a little bit to portfolio reviews. There's other ways to kind of connect with people that you like. If someone that is doing, if for example, Format Festival is doing the portfolio reviews and there are 2-3 curators that you really like, you can register and get in touch with them, for example, in that way. But yes, I do think, and I do recommend, and I know this can be a bit intimidating and daunting as well, but to get in touch with the people that you really look up to and trying to create those connections. Another one is artist. I mean, kind of seeing yourself as an artist, the role of an artist, and what about beyond as well? Kind of maybe getting a bit of that idea of what as an artist, what kind of define you as an artist, and how do you want to kind of explore that title, role, and occupation, you know, in many different ways, you know. Sarah, for example, was mentioning being a performance artist, but kind of moving more towards larger kind of visual arts practice, for example. What about workshop facilitation as an artist? What about a curator as an artist as well? What about doing events and producing events as an artist, doing workshops? I mean, I said that already, but more kind of community of participatory type of practice too, that could be related to your practice, or writing as well, for example. So there's kind of opening up the idea and the window of being an artist as well. I think it could be, you know, firstly, something totally of interest, but also like a survival thing as well. Everyone is able to, in some ways, yeah, kind of be like a multifaceted artist, maybe. Yeah, I think this is quite an exciting and can be quite a surprising thing as well. So I have a little question following up from that section, which is more for you to think about once again. Oh yes, I was sharing, yes, the PhotoWorks was just an example of a newsletter. I quite badly deconstructed this newsletter, but yeah, I really liked it. Nice image, and yeah, just like a short text kind of saying what's going on. And yeah, quite simply. So yes, the next one is a time to share, if you're willing to do so again. And the question is, what tips would you like to share with everyone? What has worked for you, or what would you like to experiment as well, in terms of your work, in terms of how you want to be in touch with places, spaces, curators, practitioners, for example. So just maybe a couple of minutes just to think about, is there anything you want to share amongst this group that has worked for you in the past, or that you would like to experiment because someone told you that it works, or it's really beneficial, or being beneficial for them. So yeah, anything that you would like to share. So just a couple of minutes.
I think something that someone shared with me was having kind of like not being afraid maybe to sometimes add like a human side, like to show the human behind the work. So maybe kind of like with your newsletter, or particularly what some artists like to do on Instagram, is they might do a post that might not be directly linked to their practice or their work, or and kind of like having that balance kind of creates sometimes like a nice relationship. And it's just also a reminder, I suppose, of the human behind the work. Although I do know that some people do prefer for, you know, only to just strictly showcase their work online. One piece of advice that someone gave me was, you know, not being afraid to have, you know, sometimes, you know, a meme or two, or, you know, something a bit more lighthearted to break up like their feed as well.
Nice, that's a good one. Okay, we can move on if there's no one willing to share. So artist development schemes. Oh, sorry, Saz, you're muted. Did you want to say something? Sorry, I don't want to... two people have raised their hands, sorry, just in this. And let's see who, Laura.
Yeah, it was just a quick one following on from that. And I know that you had mentioned like following practitioners that you really like, and I've found like thinking about sharing other people's work, like amplifying other artists and things that are going on, things that I'm interested in or that maybe my practice aligns with in some way, and like amplifying other people and kind of seeing that as like as also a way of showing online, know what kind of work you're also interested in, and then it kind of develops a nice reciprocal relationship then, where then other artists who maybe you've shared their events or their practice then maybe do the same thing for you, and kind of spread, you know, get word out about your things that way. And that feels like a really important part of like practice, but like also like developing artistic community and things like that. So that was just all I wanted to share.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks. And Shaista?
Yeah, just kind of, well, thanks for all your tips, firstly, and the whole presentation has been really, really great so far. But just to echo some of Laura's points just there as well, it's like the biggest tip that I found, and unfortunately it's only happened in the last year or so, is the peer group thing, which I mean, personally, I find it very hard to find where I fit in and which artists could be kind of who I respect and who I'd want to kind of learn from and with. And that's been quite like transformative for me in this last year or so. And the other big thing that was a learning point was actually being really discerning with what I pay for, because in my earlier years, I threw so much money that I didn't have at things, at competitions. And now I kind of have this thing where I don't pay to play unless it's like really, really, going to have a tangible impact. So like you were talking about format, that's kind of something that strategically that could work. But often there's so many things that they build to you as being potentially really super helpful, but often it's just a money-making scheme. So that's something that I've definitely learned. But the peer group thing has just been transformative.
Thank you for sharing your experience, Shaista. And actually, just to mention, and to go back to something that I recommended earlier on, was to maybe get in touch and being related to Workshop Grow, which very much relate to that, I think. You know, this kind of peer group, but just very simply kind of portfolio crits, which I've experienced with them, and was really, really nice format in terms of bringing someone for a conversation and or a curator in conversation with maybe a pool of 10 artists that are talking one after the other, presenting their work, and having just a constructing feedback all together was really, really nice. And yeah, I think that's definitely to be highlighted. And it's nice that you share that as well, Shaista, which is where we met as well, actually. You were part of this one, I remember. Yes, Camille?
Bonjour, Cindy.
Bonjour.
I just wanted to share about the contacting like artists that you really like. For example, it's like it can be awkward the first time you do it. I think whether it's through Instagram or maybe by email, but with again, Shaista will know, I think, but with Workshop Growth, so in the first semester we did a group publication. Then we received some, and we were encouraged to send them to either someone that we consider like a mentor or someone from the industry we have a connection with. Thinking like it's a nice thing to like send something physical, for example, to someone else that you want to connect with. And I know with mine, for example, I sent as well like a couple of small risograph prints that I made. So it's like adding something physical usually, so that people have something memorable or something nice to put on their wall and remember you by. I think it's someone that we always, like as artists, appreciate, because it's always nice to have something to hold on to.
Yes, definitely. It's nice to also experiment with ways to connect with people in general. I like the idea of publication. I like the idea of something that can also be material as a point of connection, definitely. Yeah. Nice. That's really nice. Thank you for sharing. And I think there's no more hand raised. So there's another one from Abby. I will just read it quickly. Small tip that's worked for me: starting an informal conversation, like commenting on someone's Instagram post to get communication started, leading to communication in DMs, is a good way to network and has gotten me opportunities in the past, and is perhaps less intimidating than a formal email. Absolutely, any ways to connect really is, and however you feel comfortable, I think is very key, and yeah, and just suitable to yourself and how you want to be working. And if this is, you know, suitable on both sides, then why not? Definitely. So maybe we can go ahead. So the next one, point number 8, is artist development schemes as a way to also kind of develop your work, getting support. And this can be very much within organizations, could be like, platforms that is specializing in that as well. I mean, as a platform that is an artist development organization, association, etc., are, I think, very beneficial in the way that you can get ongoing support as well as advices and guidance with your work. So they're very much specializing in working with artists, sometimes with curators as well. One example of that is a platform called Experimental, which is present at New Art Exchange. So this is currently pending due to the pandemic, but also the lack of funding and the staff capacity at the moment with the scheme, which is kind of giving that a bit of a pause. But at the moment, the scheme used to be kind of allowing for local artists to be part of this scheme and have opportunities to be supported through group discussion meetings, or having a session and invite a guest to be in contact with the artist for a type of masterclass, or having one-to-one mentoring sessions as well with myself. I was the main leader of the project and the kind of second phase of that scheme, as well as supporting and applying for funding, for project guidance as well. An example that I gave earlier too is supporting and developing a portfolio, for example, for an artist that wants to present the work to specific contact, identifying different venues and galleries for artists and kind of getting in touch as well, and using that institutional support in order to do that contact is quite key too. So there's different artist development schemes that are present and available in the UK and beyond as well, which can help you develop but be supported. I think supported is maybe the best way as well in order to develop your work, your practice, and understanding where you're at, but also getting a boost, let's say, in what to do next, for example. So this was one, but there is also another one which is quite nice at Eastside Projects called EOP. And this is an active program that has similar offer to what I've just mentioned with Experimental at the New Art Exchange. They are based in Birmingham and it's open to artists nationally. So this scheme membership has to be, has a fee to it, associated to it, is £60 for a year, but you're able to take part in different events, but also talks, as well as getting a bit of a peer group, as we just mentioned. And this is something that they offer too. So there's different offers. There's also like, on their website, they have a page for the members' activity, for example. So Eastside Project being an organization that's very affluent and very active and just having really exciting programs is an amazing way also to show your work in your activities and updates on their website directly. So there's different ways to kind of be visible, as well as getting support from organization and people that work in this organization more extensively as well. So that's these two. And then another kind of point that I've added is applying for prizes, awards, and funded programs. So these can be visible, available via, for example, the newsletter of Arts Council England. They would advertise that sort of opportunities. Social media is also a good way to kind of keep up to date with that, depending on, your kind of channels. Jerwood Arts, for example, as an organization, has many different bursaries and awards that are attributed to artists based in the UK, for example. So there's different platforms for that. So these could be a way to also, kind of like develop your work, but also kind of give a bit of get a bit of a push, especially if it's associated with a bursary, for example. There's a lot of pros and cons about the idea of prizes and awards, but this could be a way of developing your work in some ways. And then residency programs as well. So residency programs can be funded or not funded, collective or individual as well, to be mentored and supported by an independent structure or within an organization. during a specific duration as well. So it could be a year where you are connecting with the space, maybe like twice a month, for example. It could be that you are going away. I have many different spaces for residency in abroad, for example, such as Capacete in Mexico, for example, where they have artists from all around the world pay for everything while the artists are present in their spaces, as well as the fees and transportation, etc. So there's many different really exciting programs that are available, but it's a question of knowing where they are, getting up to date and keeping up to date with them to have those opportunities. And it's a really amazing way to kind of have a bit of a pause as well, a residency, for example, for a month, to have a bit of a pause within your work, but just to think and kind of reconsider things within your work, or also develop specific aspects of your work. The residency could also offer a space to connect with relevant people in the specific location in which the residency is, to develop elements of the work, to do collaboration, to use certain services, facilities, etc. So yeah, many residency programs and spaces that are existing. So I highly recommend to look into those and connect. This is something that is of interest. And as I mentioned, Wising Art Center is one of them, based in Cambridgeshire. It was really good, I think. Delphina Foundation, for example, Jerwood Arts, as I mentioned, and one very local too, to Nottingham at least, 1 Thoresby Street, which has sometimes, some residencies too. They have a few kind of spaces available and facilities that can be used as well. So there are things around which can be really beneficial in terms of support, but also for yourself in general. I mean, for the practice in general. And finally, the funding grants, not necessarily related as such by artist development, or could be. Arts Council, for example, has a grant called Developing Your Creative Practice, which allows you to apply with a specific proposal to get funding. It's up to £10,000 to develop your practice very much. It's not to fund a project, it's not to fund a residency, it's not to fund any other type of needs, but it's very much about creating your work and creating yourself. I mean, developing yourself, your growth as an artist as well. So this is one that could be very interesting for most of you. And it's very open in terms of the art forms as well. So it's not bound to specific art forms. It's quite broad. So that's a really good one, for example. So funding grants are very key as well in terms of artist development, I would say. So the next slide, I think I put an example of Eastside projects, just how they kind of organize that. So you can find the information on their website. So Eastside project, and their scheme is called EOP. So yeah, they're pretty good. And this is just a page on the right side. You can see the members' activity and how they kind of organize that within their website. So it's a really nice visibility, as well as being embedded within that organization in some ways. So the next slide will be more focused on the international work. So most of the points that I've mentioned previously applies to international exposure as well, whether it's a residency program, whether it's reaching out to people outside of the UK to get yourself known, your work known, opportunities kind of extended outside of here, international programs, as well as open calls, for example, boot camps, workshops, etc. I highly recommend it if this is of interest, obviously, to extend your work on an international level. So I'd be really happy to discuss that in more depth afterwards, maybe in Q&As as well, about how to do so and what would be the benefits and to what kind of scale and how to do that, really. I wouldn't say there's necessarily a way of doing this or connecting, apart from, once again, really kind of following and getting to know and researching a little bit the spaces and the people that are active within the arts and culture scene sector within a specific country, for example. And this could be very much as a first point of contact, a museum, or looking into a Ministry of Culture, for example, which could have a repertory of different practitioners and organizations to direct yourself into where you want to be. So I think for this one is very much kind of looking into the spaces that exist. If you want to work in Colombia, or if you want to work in Senegal or in Austria, Spain, etc. It's very much looking into the specificity of each of the sectors. So going back to this idea of how does it work, in that other space, those other countries, and understanding who is kind of the main actors there, who is kind of which spaces are making the kind of landscape or the cultural scene in a specific place. So yeah, that's a really nice way to start in understanding really where you think you would fit as well, where you think you would like to be involved in if you were to work in Germany, for example, in Berlin, or in Spain, Madrid, etc., etc. So it's understanding what would you get out of that, and what are the different steps that you feel you would need to. But yeah, happy to answer any question about this, and to kind of bring up my personal experience here as well. It was very much that kind of broadening up, my kind of interest and research interest, and following what programs and exhibitions and talks, etc., are taking place. Who is doing what? Who is involved as a kind of curator, writers, etc., around the world, really. So this kind of opening up and having a lot of curiosity around it, that kind of allows you to open some doors, let's say. I think it's a really exciting one. And it's just a possibility to kind of connect and compare, positively compare, and just having a broader vision also about why is happening, what are the limitations, what are the spaces that you navigate in the UK and outside of that, really. So it's a really big bonus, I would say. And the next slide, please. So that was just an example in terms of international work and where to connect to. For example, there's many different spaces that would also give opportunities and calls, for example, in the specific region, such as the Biennale Foundation. If you were interested, for example, to be part or understanding more of the processes of being part of a Biennale, what are the processes to be an artist that shows in the Biennale, for example, or an international festival, or an international photography festival, kind of understanding the different bits, the different steps really that takes you there in those spaces. Biennales, for example, do you have open calls to? So the Biennale Foundation is a way to find out when are the open calls. For each of the Biennale, there's a really good directory of Biennales, for example. And then I put the Sharjah Art Foundation, who has that are based in Sharjah, in UAE, and they have like calls and opportunities constantly uploaded on their website, which are related to the region, but also North Africa. So very much Middle East and North Africa opportunities and beyond that relates and connects with what they're about and what they do. So yeah, it's a really nice way to keep up to date too. And they're very generous in terms of sharing. And there's many organizations that do so. So it's about finding those spaces that you feel you connect with and understanding, the kind of generous exchange that they're willing to, that they're giving, but also, for you to connect with that and get up to date in general. So the next slide, which is also the final, I think I messed up my numbers. I think I messed up my numbers, no? Or maybe not. I can't remember what the last one is now. Yes, I did. It's okay. We're going to be online. And this final point was more kind of coming from me directly. So kind of advices from a curator's experience. And how do I seek artists and for which opportunities as well. So this kind of recaps a little bit what was mentioned during these talks, and very much about me as a curator, kind of looking for artists sometimes for collaborations, for opportunities such as an exhibition, not necessarily in the UK, but internationally, online as well, talks, etc. Is very much done once again through online presence. I love using Instagram, for example, to look for artists, to get to know artists, as well as the newsletter constantly. Both of them have been a really good way to connect with certain spaces, programs, to kind of dig into artist work and kind of opening up like all other kind of clusters and areas of work and kind of discourses within practices as well. So they have been really, really key. I think I shared an example in my next slide, but I was just like an example of, for example, on Instagram, and Saz touched upon that earlier on, giving an example of how you can present your work. So this is an artist based in Brussels called Bahati Simoens. And the way that she organizes her Instagram, for example, is very simple, kind of showing in a profile contact detail, and also like an exhibition that she has currently, but also having these different dots at the bottom of the left side image of different projects, but also locations where she's seen her work, for example, which can be organized that way too, as a way to archive, once again, similarly to a website, let's say. We're using that on Instagram. And the way that she organizes her Instagram posts, for example, being an alternative, a mix between showing close-up of the work, entire works, but also, you know, spaces in which she is, or just activities that she gets to be part of, for example. So that's just like a little basic examples, and kind of where I personally like to dig into, Instagram being one of them. And of course, meeting and word of mouth is really key too, in terms of understanding who is around, who is doing what as well at the moment. So connecting with other curators and discussing really much around practices. It's really, really key. The conversation, the informal conversation that take place outside of those online presence spaces as well is really important. So yeah, it's kind of navigating different communities, let's say, online, offline, word of mouth, as tools that are very, very valid in terms of getting yourself known. But yeah, that's that. I think I had other points. Yes, that's good. Thank you so much. Thank you. I was wondering if you had any comments, feedback, questions, and we have about 10 minutes, a little bit more, if you wish, for anything.
I think we had a question from Camille earlier about what advice. Oh, actually, Camille, would you like to ask that question directly?
Yeah, that's fine if you don't mind. I was just wondering if you had any advice for someone who's based in the UK but wants to maybe make more contact or participate in programs based in France. Just because I feel I'm based in Wales, but I think like some of the programs are obviously more orientated towards Welsh artists or Welsh speaking artists. And unfortunately, I'm neither of those. So I'm struggling a little bit to find a path forwards. So I'm kind of looking back towards maybe making work or trying to find something to do in France.
And what is your practice, Camille?
Visual artist, photographer.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a bit of a mix because I write, but I work with text, image, sound. So a bit of a mix.
Nice, that's really nice. That's good. That's what I was talking about earlier, actually, about being an artist with multifaceted interest and skills as well. In terms of connecting with France, I would say it's about checking and researching as well the spaces in which you would like to be involved with there as well. I very much relate to what you're saying in terms of connecting there. I was born also in France, and I kind of moved here in my early 20s, and trying to understand how to reconnect with the space. I think France has a very different way of operating within the sector.
Absolutely. That's why I've been a bit lost looking back and trying to find my way, because I wasn't born in a big city either. I'm from Angoulême. I don't know if you know it, but
yes,
yeah, it's quite isolated in a way. So it's like trying to find my way in is a bit mind-blowing.
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the French art sector specifically can be quite exclusionary and very difficult to navigate in. I think if you're not involved within it, it can be very difficult to try and find a path within it. So it's very much about understanding where would you like to be within, institutions in France, for example, commercial gallery or artist-led spaces, which are actually very rare in France. So the UK has a very different offer in terms of where you can be involved as an artist. There's a breadth of spaces and opportunities that arise that are very different, I think. And same in terms of the funding in France as well. There's barely, any public funding for artists to apply to. The Arts Council is very unique in a way. It doesn't really exist in France. The Ministry of Culture doesn't necessarily have, this pot of money to redistribute to artists. So France is a difficult terrain, I would say, definitely, but nothing is lost. There are some really beautiful spaces. I'm more aware of spaces in Paris and Marseille, I would say, not necessarily like so much around. In terms of photography, there are quite big photography fairs, such as FIAC, for example, which could be a good point of connection. I mean, the first point of connection, and of course, AL as well, Photography Festival. Yeah. If you want to kind of look into how do things work, even within those platforms of a photography fair, but also a photography festival, could be a starting point in terms of identifying, who is around, that scene, who is around, those kind of spaces as well. What are the different initiatives? And this could be, for example, bumping into a talks program, which could open up, different curators, practitioners that you can relate to in contact, for example, to see and identify ways for you to be involved and seek opportunities, ideally funding too. And I'm not sure if you want to connect to France more in terms of exhibition-wise, residency-wise. But yeah, the Ministry of Culture might have things on their website too, to see a little bit what is happening really in France. Where is the money going, in terms of arts and culture as well. So maybe understanding this would be really crucial to see then and navigate a little bit, about that. But yeah, AL would be incredible to kind of look into the program and how they're doing things. Rencontre d'AL.
I was gonna try to see if I could go this year, but I'm not sure with the quarantine and the PCR test and all that. But
yes, sadly.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry for taking up so much time.
No, at all.
So we had a question from Millie that was asked in the chat. I know it was answered in the chat, but I don't know if Millie, you wanted to ask the question openly, the question about mailing lists. Or I'm happy to ask on your behalf if you like. So I'll just quickly go to the question from Millie. What's a good service to use for mailing lists? To have a link people can add themselves with, or is it best to literally just make your own list of contacts manually? I think you touched on it slightly, isn't it, about what you can't do and can't do in terms of adding people to the mailing list. But do you have any advice on what the best way would be in terms of?
Sorry, I'm really sorry. I missed the beginning of the.
Yeah, sorry. What's a good service to use for mailing lists? To have a quick. Oh yeah, and then it says to have a quick link people can add themselves with, or is it best to literally just make your own list of contacts manually?
I would say maybe a bit of both, as good practice. I would maybe, if there is also as an online presence, whether website, social media, etc., to also encourage people to sign up. Website is a more easy way to do that by just kind of sending. You can put an option as to subscribe to my mailing list, for example, on your website directly, which could be a good way to do so. I don't know if this can be done individually, actually. If this is more like an organization option that you can have on the website, but that would be really good. I mean, personally, this is something that I do a lot. I'm on the website, I really enjoy it. I want to follow what an artist or an organization is doing, and I kind of register myself. And it's a way to keep up to date with that person or space. So I would advise for both. I would advise to maybe insert a kind of newsletter tab within a website or within, social media, and just saying you can contact me on this email address to follow my work, or just very much manually as well, as you meet people too, as you kind of email people and just asking directly to. It's this kind of confidentiality policy has really shifted the way that we kind of get in touch really and keep in touch with people. But yeah, I guess it was very much for safer practices online, definitely. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, and just to, I mean, I know it was answered in the chat as well. MailChimp is a really good platform for
Definitely.
mailing lists. And I think someone may have mentioned something about web hosting websites like Wix or Squarespace also have like a mailing list function. And it's great because it collates things automatically. You can generate a link where people can sign up, or with permission, you can then manually add people. So there's a mixture with them. So there'll be just a couple more questions before we wrap up. So we'll get, there's a question from Ginger, and then after Ginger, a question from, let me just make sure, from, I think it was from Amy. Let me just make sure. Oh, yes, from Amy. So Ginger, would you like to ask your question? Or I'm happy to ask the question on your behalf. So Ginger asked, so Ginger mentioned, I keep coming across residencies that are so ridiculously expensive, like you were paying 5 times the local rent. Are these just money-making schemes?
Good question. Good question. Yes, I would definitely advise to kind of, kind of watch out in terms of what you can actually afford as well. Some of them can be very expensive, definitely. But it's also important to see that funding is a good opportunity, a good resource as well to seek in order to take part in residency programs. So you can, for example, apply for developing your creative practice from Arts Council, for example, and ask within, ask within the budget or outline in the budget that you want to take part in certain residency. Some of them might be annual, some of them might be biannual, etc., but kind of planning within your plan of what is my development practice kind of program and timeline, etc., and factoring that within your budget to allow for you to apply, to allow for you to be fully funded through Arts Council, for example. So that could be a way to go around it. If a residency scheme is looking extremely great and related to what you would like to do and be part of, it could be a way to kind of, getting support and seeking support for that specific residency program, or as part of like a larger grant that you're receiving for your development. And some residencies, and I think it's good to research that as well, are fully funded as well. So maybe it's about looking for residencies that are kind of giving that resource initially too, if, finances is a problem too, which I totally understand, because sometimes it is really ridiculous. So yeah, these would be my kind of two to go to, really. Funded residencies, which do exist and are really good too. And secondly, getting funding, seeking funding that would involve and include really very much the expenses of taking part in a residency program.
And just to add to that as well, thinking about them, so the presentations that we had yesterday, so our 2 artists, I know that Ryan mentioned Bloomberg New Contemporaries, which is quite, I think it's quite pricey, but he was also speaking about how the artists that are part of that program do end up to have quite very successful careers, lucrative careers. So it is quite beneficial and worth it in terms of the finances. And then Jamisha, she was speaking more from kind of like an open call point of view. So some open calls for exhibitions do have fees. And so she was speaking about kind of just weighing out what is worth it for you, not putting yourself out of pocket for an opportunity, but also kind of looking at sources for funding as well. So I think it's very much about what, if there are opportunities out there that do cost money and they may not be funded, I think it's very much more about, can you afford it? And is it the right time for you to do it? But also looking out and seeing what else is available. And then if it is a massive opportunity, you know, if there is one that, you know, has a really good track record of, you know, supporting artists and getting artists out there, that might be something for you to consider as well. But yes, as Cindy mentioned, there's a lot of funding out there for residencies, for support for residencies as well, and a lot of residencies are do provide financial support. And I think another thing to do as well is, if you were unsure about paying to do residency, a great option is looking at reviews as well. So if it's a residency that happens annually or whatnot, maybe kind of looking to see what maybe reaching out to a previous cohort, and finding out how they benefit from the residency, if it was worth it, if it was worth the money that they'd spent on it, and maybe also asking other artists how they were able to maybe fund their residence as well. That might be something that that might also be useful. So we're just going to go for the last question, which is from Amy, which is regarding finance. Amy, I didn't know if you wanted to ask the question.
I can do. Thanks. Yeah, I don't have it right in front of me here, but it's basically just any tips on talking about money, because it's a kind of embarrassing topic to me. I know some people are very matter of fact about it, but you know, when might you expect that a gallery, say, would bring it up, or when might you be the one to bring it up? Or do you need to already have an established relationship? Or if you want to be paid to do something, is it better to be upfront about that, or better to wait and see what they would offer first? Just any tips in general. And I've just seen that somebody has also sent some resources in the chat, so thank you also for those.
Perfect. Yes, that's a very important question in terms of kind of managing this conversation around finance, budget, fees when working with galleries. I think it's really key to be quite direct, you know, with the space and the curator that you work with, for example, in what the expectation would be on your side to develop any sort of project, commission, but also exhibition, talks, any sort of involvement with the space. I think it's really key. Your work has to be remunerated, and has to be remunerated in the way that deserves, that you identify, but also especially coming from galleries and institutions that are publicly funded should be paying the work that you do. And this is a conversation that should come up quite early. I would say earlier than later, definitely. Being in contact with the spaces, you know, emailing, having meetings, for example, meetings, that could be planning meetings as well, you know, putting a proposal together, discussing the idea of an exhibition is work in itself, and this should be remunerated and being considered within the work that you'll be doing, you know, further production of work for, you know, the kind of like a writing text, interpretation text for an exhibition, for example. So your work should be remunerated and considered as a very first conversation. You know, first meeting, for example, needs to be outlined. It needs to be discussed seriously. Every work and every minute that you spend on the project of developing an exhibition, for example, needs to be taken into account in the work and the relationship with the institution, gallery, etc. So I would say the earliest possible is the best. And this is a very basic conversation, very basic points that needs to be addressed, I think. And this is very much, you're right, and this is what the organization should be providing if they want to work with you. So definitely. But I understand that this can be a point that can be a little bit maybe bringing tension. But it would bring tension only if an organization is not actually covering, you know, for the fees, and not covering for at least the basic finances that needs to support your work, you know, the value of your work and the time that is put in the work and the materials and everything that is needed, you know, for your work. So yeah, the earliest possible, and the consideration around that. And I was also mentioning during the presentation at the beginning, this idea of respect and mutual care that comes into working with spaces, whether it's the artist kind of directly to galleries and spaces, but also like on the other side. So this mutual kind of relationship that needs to happen in terms of, we cannot assume that artists will be working for free, and this needs to be considered within meeting times and planning times and all of the rest. So yes, very, very important point.
Thank you so much. That's great. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Cindy. And on that note, we've come to the end of today's session and masterclass. Thank you so much to Cindy, and thank you so much for offering, your advice and your tips and all the practical steps as well. And thank you so much to all of you for being with us this afternoon. I know we've run slightly over time, but we do appreciate you staying on and also engaging with this session. And we hope that you found the practical advice useful and beneficial for you in your practice. So just to let you know that this session has been recorded, so you'll be able to watch that back on YouTube, along with all the other sessions from this Navigating 2021 and Beyond series. And I know my colleague, just to follow up on the finance side of things, my colleague Laura did place a link to one of our previous sessions, How to Run and Fund a Creative Business, and she's placed the link for that session on there, so do feel free to watch back. You'll also be able to watch yesterday's session back as well, and just to let you know, our next session in the series is How to Work with Socially Engaged Practice, and that will take place on Thursday the 17th of June between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. For those who attended yesterday, you may remember Ryan speaking briefly about social practice engagement work that he's done with galleries as well, and so we'll be going more in depth with 4 specialists and panelists. So do book onto that, and we can place the link for that session to book to that session in the chat. But yes, do continue to attend these sessions, and we do hope you find them useful. Do keep in touch with us. I know Cindy mentioned a lot about mailing list. You can also sign up to our mailing list. You can keep up to date with what's going off with UK New Artists on our website as well. We do put out opportunities throughout, and we do have our current future producers opportunity that is currently being advertised, where you'll have the opportunity to bring an idea to life collaboratively with other artists, and there's money for fees and also project expenses, and you'll also receive mentorship. And I'm one of the mentors as well for that program, if anyone wants to. but do have a look on our website for opportunities as well. And I know that sometimes on our social media we do share opportunities from some of other partner organisations as well. But thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a lovely evening. What I might just do is ask Laura if we can just keep this open for another couple of minutes, because I noticed there was a bit of exchanging of websites and addresses and stuff. We'll keep this open for a little bit if you want to just exchange or just put your website out there. But yeah, thank you so much.